your nation, your province, your Southern Alberta. From the heart of Lethbridge, it's Bridge City News Weekend Edition.
Thanks for joining us for our Week in Review. I'm Naveen Day. There is a senior in Medicine Hat who says he is looking into a medically assisted death. Les Landry says he simply cannot afford to live after losing his disability benefits. He says he can't afford essentials, including his medication. BCN's Angela Stewart caught up with Les to talk about what led to his decision.
If I am going to do this, I want the world to know just how bad this is.
Each and every day is a struggle for Medicine Hat senior Les Landry, not just physically, but also mentally.
I never knew that when you turn 65, your life ends.
On his 65th birthday, Landry says his AISH benefits were cut off, and he lost everything from his service dog allowance to medical transportation, as well as getting covered prescription refills, necessities he needs to get by on as a person living with a disability.
The revenue I get is actually less than what I used to get on AISH. My expenses went up 300%.
Because of the financial hurdles, day-to-day chronic consistent pain, and a lack of quality of life, Landry says he's now considering a different path, MAID, also known as medical assistance in dying.
My future looks bleak. This process, while I'm going through the pain and I'm going through the emotional turmoil and every other thing, this is not an easy decision.
Legislation has now changed in Canada. However, previously, the only people who could request a medically assisted death would be those living with a terminal illness.
The doctor just has to determine that the condition that this person has is not going to get better, which in this case is probably correct. He has a disability.
MLA for Cypress Medicine Hat, Drew Barnes, says he's heard from many who are struggling financially like Landry.
Utilities, the food inflation is crazy. We still don't have enough competition in our insurance business as well. It's very, very hard for people in modest incomes to make a go of it. But long term, the government of Alberta has to make life more affordable and make it so we all have more individual opportunity.
Those who do request a medically assisted death do have an option to back out of the process.
This is really about doctors and nurse practitioners deciding that they agree that your life is not worth living, and if they're willing to go ahead and do it, the law allows them to cause your death.
Are you ready to die with the help of doctors?
Yes. As I sit here right now, yes.
If approved, Landry says he's 90% sure he will be going through with a medically assisted death. For Bridge City News, I'm Angela Stewart.
Thank you, Angela, for that moving story. Alberta's opposition party recently called on the UCP government to immediately re-index AISH to inflation to help some of our provinces most vulnerable. A love story that took place during the First World War has now been released. It is featured in a book called Lethbridge, A Tale of Love in a Time of War. The characters dig into the trenches of France and the subsequent military hospitals of England. The story also brings readers to Lethbridge. Alberta author Terry McConnell says the book is historical fiction and was inspired by his own grandparents.
The three main characters and a lot of the supporting characters were actual people who lived at that time in Lethbridge and in some of the other locales where the story takes place.
Former journalist and current author Terry McConnell wrote the book called Lethbridge, A Tale of Love in a Time of War.
The story is driven by actual events, things that happen, not just major events like the battle at Vimy Ridge, which is a central part of the story, but actually even the things that happened to the three characters themselves happened in real life. I built a fictional story around historical events.
McConnell conducted extensive research for the book as he hunkered down in Crystal Beach, Ontario to get to work.
I was there for 7 weeks, and that's where I got down into the nitty-gritty of researching the book, and I spent a lot of time at that. I didn't even start writing for probably a year after that. Ancestry CA was a surprisingly helpful resource. I gave them a nice little shout out in the acknowledgments of the book because I found out a lot of stuff that I didn't know otherwise.
The novel is currently in the process of being created into an audiobook as well.
I won't be doing the narrative. We're hiring a guy to do that. He has all the accents. He does a great East End London accent. He does a great Scottish accent. He didn't know how to do a New England accent. So I told him, I says, do Jack Kennedy. And so he did. And he got pretty close.
You might recognize the high-level bridge in Lethbridge behind me, which is also featured on the cover of the book. McConnell says there's a potential for a future sequel to the novel down the line, but nothing's been set in stone quite yet. For Bridge City News, I'm Micah Quinn.
After the break, stories from around our province. This includes the Premier's reaction and response to the passing of Queen Elizabeth II. He also responds to Ottawa's stance towards plastics, which Kenny says will have a negative impact on Alberta's economy. Queen Elizabeth II passed away this week at the age of 96. She died peacefully on Thursday evening at the Balmoral Castle in Scotland. 74-year-old King Charles has now assumed the throne and is head of state for 14 Commonwealth realms. Queen Elizabeth II was Britain's longest reigning sovereign, sitting on the throne for 70 years. She was also the world's oldest monarch. Alberta Premier Jason Kenney reflected back on the late Queen's multiple visits to the province, saying Her late Majesty demonstrated a deep affection for this place and its people. Her name will live on forever here on schools and streets, roadways and buildings, and indeed Mount Queen Elizabeth and the Queen Elizabeth Range of our majestic Rocky Mountains. Many students went back to school this week. The province says it is creating the Premier's Council on Skills to help ensure students learn the skills they need to help secure Alberta's future. Premier Jason Kenney says apprenticeship training is vital to the success of our province. He says the government will be working alongside a number of industries to ensure success for students.
This task force, the Premier's Skills Task Force, will bridge the gap between industry, government, and education institutions, including at least one member from industries in each of the following areas: ag and forestry, tourism, construction, of course the energy sector, technology, aviation, aerospace and logistics, finance and fintech, that's financial technology, and the health industry. Because obviously we have strategies to address the current and pending shortage of healthcare workers.
Also this week, the province announced that it is expanding contracts with surgical facilities across Southern and Central Alberta, which will reduce wait times and deliver around 2,600 more surgeries closer to home. The 1,250 more procedures will be delivered in our region in the South Zone. Officials say moving more orthopedic and other general surgeries into chartered surgical facilities will free up operating room space in hospitals. Premier Jason Kenney says it is important to get more surgeries done.
So if anybody tries to argue that contracting out publicly insured surgeries to privately operated clinics is risky or unproven, let's be clear, the data says the opposite is true. We contract out surgeries because doing that means we get more surgeries done more quickly, all of them publicly insured. Because it's good for patients and it helps us deliver on the need to provide faster publicly funded care.
Kenney added that Budget 2022 also provides $133 million over 3 years to expand and build new operating rooms in hospitals in many cities in Alberta, including Lethbridge, Medicine Hat, Calgary, and Edmonton. A 27-year-old Alberta man has died following a stabbing outside of a Banff nightclub last weekend. Police say they received a 911 call about a Foothills County man in distress at the bar on Banff Avenue early Saturday. He was taken to the hospital but later died. 20-year-old John Spruill of Lake County, BC was charged with second-degree murder. RCMP say they do not believe the incident is related to a fight at another bar in Banff, which left a 26-year-old resident of the town dead. A 22-year-old man has been charged with second-degree murder from that attack. Premier Jason Kenney announced that the province will intervene and make submissions in a legal challenge arguing against Ottawa's move to list plastics as toxic substances.
Labeling plastics toxic substances is already having a negative impact on Alberta's responsible and growing petchem industry by creating uncertainty for those investors. An analysis by the Ministry of Jobs, Economy and Innovation estimated that potentially over $30 billion is at risk.
Parks Canada has been working to restore West Slope cutthroat trout in Banff National Park. Up to 5,000 small fish have been released into Hidden Lake in the backcountry near the Lake Louise ski resort.
So we're at Hidden Lake in Banff National Park, and today we're just finishing some work to reintroduce West Slope cutthroat trout into this lake. We have some eggs that we put into the lake about 3 weeks ago. They're almost fully mature, and we are just about to release them down into the creek and the lake over the next few days. West Slope cutthroat trout are threatened in Alberta, and they're one of the fish that belongs in Banff National Park. They used to be in this lake, and about 50 years ago, brook trout were introduced into this lake and extinguished the cutthroat. And a super important part of Parks Canada's mandate is to protect species at risk, and so we're in the process of putting the species back where it used to be in Banff.
Are there enough resources to protect those in rural communities? A spokesperson with Alberta Rural Crime Watch gives us his insights on gun rights and a provincial police force. That interview is coming up after this short break. Many Canadians are concerned about their safety, especially in rural areas. A number of farmers and ranchers on the prairies are concerned about police arriving on time when a trespasser threatens their families or property. Cor DeWitt from Alberta Rural Crime Watch spoke with Hal Roberts to give us his insights on the issues of rural crime in Alberta.
What are some of the biggest needs of residents in rural communities, especially when it comes to public safety? What are you hearing, Cor?
Well, the biggest thing that they're looking at right now is a timeline of between RCMP getting out to the rural area where the incident has taken place, and the rates. The rate of crime increases in some communities, and it's kind of funny when you look at it this way. You see an increase in break and enters from 5 to 10 a month, and suddenly there's a 50% increase, and it's not really a 50% increase. It's just a little bit of a rush on break and enters. And the next month it'll go down and they say, okay, it's a decrease. We've done our job. Well, we haven't really done our job. It's just gone down naturally. So the statistics are kind of funny to analyze.
Do you feel perhaps that there may be a smaller police presence in rural Alberta and across the prairies?
I don't know if there's a smaller presence at all. I think it's just a matter of where they are needed at the time. If there's a rush in a certain area of Alberta, a certain district or county, then there may be some resources spread out into that area to help combat the problem. And then another area feels that they're being shortened out because maybe the criminal has moved into another area. There's not as many police officers running around, and that'll sort of skews the results of the statistics, right? It's all stats nowadays. That's what they follow in order to find out whether they're doing a good job or bad job, or where resources need to be placed. I mean, I'm not a police officer. I don't get involved in the placement of police officers, but I can see it where they have an area that is very, very rural, very sparsely populated. They cannot have 20 officers driving around the county all the time checking on everything. But when something happens in one end, 2 or 3 officers head out there, or the other end of the county is not being taken care of.
It must be a real challenge for a lot of RCMP as well that head out to rural communities. Range Road 22, by the hay bale, by this rock, or by Range Road 485. And you really have to know your region, don't you, to be able to arrive in time to be able to help families who may be threatened.
Exactly, and there's some very rural areas in Alberta, very sparsely populated, where you don't see a farmhouse for 5 or 10 kilometers. I was going to say miles, but we're in kilometers now. It's 5 or 10 miles is a long space between residents, and you don't have the neighborhood taking care of each other in that sort of sense, because they're not right across the road from each other. They're not able to keep an eye on their place, on their neighbor's place, like we have around Leduc where I live, where it's very densely populated. There's houses on every quarter section of land here, so people can watch out for each other pretty quickly. Whereas in a very sparsely populated area where there's like 5-10 kilometers between houses, you can't really keep an eye on your neighbor.
Now, the program was initially called the Alberta Range Patrol. What happened with this type of patrol?
Well, Range Patrol was primarily looking after cattle and that sort of thing, and trying to find people that were rustling cattle, and the old Western idea. and it wasn't really concerned about break and enters and car thefts and all that sort of thing that we have today.
When you're talking to a lot of farmers and ranchers corps who may be gun owners, law-abiding gun owners, and they say, we want to protect our properties, we want to protect our families, and we don't appreciate the government trying to take our guns away.
I have not had a conversation about gun control or gun access with farmers in our area at all. They've had no concerns at all. They know that you can't be vigilante, and if everyone is carrying a gun, they're going to be in trouble. That's my personal view. We're going to have issues with people pulling guns on innocent neighbors coming by to check because they've hit the ditch, they need a pull or they need some help, and you're going to have problems with that. And I feel strongly we don't need guns.
There's been a lot of talk from the UCP about bringing in a provincial police force. What are your thoughts in that regard? Would it be better than the RCMP?
Well, we worked with the RCMP for 25 years. We've had very few issues with them. We have a good program, a memorandum of understanding between the RCMP and ourselves, and it's worked very well. But we also deal with, like my group, my personal group that I deal with the Edmonton City police officers. Calgary City police officers are dealing with different groups. Lethbridge, all over the place. So we will work with whatever police force we're given.
Up next, family farming is still alive and well here in Alberta. We speak with a local dairy farmer to discuss his family's connection to the land and history of farming here in the province. Here in Southern Alberta, agriculture is the order of the day and naturally impacts every family in the region. Dairy farming is lesser known and talked about than some more visible ag sectors, but we wanted to check in with a local dairy farmer who is also the chair of Alberta Milk. Jeanette Roche sat down with Stuart Boovy of Tabor, who is a generational dairy farmer.
So at the very basics, what does Alberta Milk do and who does it serve?
So Alberta Milk is a producer in driven industry. So I've been a producer my entire life. I've been in this current location for 27 years. So the board of directors is made up of all producers. You have to be a producer to be on the board. Alberta Milk, what it does, well, it does many things. One of it is it's actually it coordinates milk receiving, milk quality, transporting milk to producers, raw milk to processors, I should say. Takes care of on-farm animal care. It does many, many things, but all, it's a producer-run organization.
Wow. Okay. So the dairy farming in Southern Alberta, would you say that it's more of a multi-generational family business, or are they owned by large corporations? What are we looking at here?
It very much tends to be multi-generational, stay in the family type business. That's certainly my roots. My father started in the 1960s in BC. That's very, very typical. Some of the farms, I know there's one west of Lethbridge, has been over 100 years in business. It really tends to stay in the family just because it really affects your life, I guess, is what I would say. It's 7 days a week, 365 days a year. If you're not born into it, you'd probably look and go, why would I want a dairy farm? But if you're born into it, it has a different draw to you, I guess, is what it is. And then, of course, in Southern Alberta, we also have the Hutterites that quite a few of them have dairies as well, which is obviously multi-generational and doesn't move, obviously. So
Definitely. So are you then moving your milk into other organizations that maybe then produce cheese, or is that all one and the same of the dairy industry?
So currently in Western Canada, we don't have a large cooperative. So what Alberta Milk does is coordinates milk transport to processors. The three major ones take about 75 to 80% of the milk produced in Canada, and that's also in Alberta.
There has been talk of countries like the US and New Zealand wanting to get their products into our markets, but is this a good idea for Canadians?
What it is we've mentioned a little bit about the Canadian Dairy Commission. It gets targeted because we have pricing set nationally, and the US targets that. because our return comes only from the marketplace. So I only make money from what the consumers pay. Other jurisdictions tend to have all sorts of programs which are not from the price of milk, but they have other programs that get money into the hands of producers, and that's where it gets murky and it gets tricky, and why you get trade deals and trade negotiations that, while we can produce milk cheaper, well, where are you making your money? Is based. It gets, when you get into the details, then it gets very complicated.
Yeah, it sounds like it. I mean, we've heard too that U.S. lobbyists are proposing that Canadians would pay less for their dairy products, but is that just their way to lobby to open up a new market?
Absolutely. It's absolutely what it is. Because what happens is, and we've just seen it even in COVID, I mean, I'm sure you're aware, in the Fraser Valley, also they were shorted with milk just because the farms were flooded, and and then there was COVID issues on trying to haul milk interprovincially. Well, they tried to get milk out of the U.S. It was 50% higher than the Canadian price.
Okay.
So it's just fascinating that they want to open the market up, and then once you've eliminated Canadian dairies, your milk price would be actually much higher.
What makes the Canadian product more high quality then?
We have regulations as far as bacteria levels and stuff like that in the raw milk that are more strict than other jurisdictions. Okay. Even though I would say the majority of the milk is nowhere near limits, like the high limit, it's still allowed. So that's one difference. The other one is they are allowed to use growth hormone in the U.S. that we're not allowed to use in Canada. So that's an animal that's been restricted for probably 20 years already, and well, at least 20, close to 25, I guess, in Canada. It is illegal to use in Canada. So we're not allowed to use it on our dairy animals. So that's another difference.
When we return, we chat with an automotive prototype builder who has started building electric motorbikes here in Southern Alberta. Electric modes of transportation are gaining in popularity. While some Canadian airlines are investigating electric aircraft, there is a Southern Alberta company that is now making electric dirt bikes. Nathan Armstrong of Armstrong Custom Fabrication chatted with Hal Roberts to discuss the advancement in EV technology and building high-quality models here in our province.
You know, Nathan, I've interviewed a few Tesla owners over the years, and they say, well, the Teslas are great for about the first 7 or 8 years, but by years 9 and 10, they have to replace all of the batteries. And a lot of times it's not even worth doing that because it's $20,000. It's so expensive replacing the batteries. They just turf the car. So what about the batteries when it comes to replacing them on the electric bikes?
Well, they're about $2,500 all cost to build them. That's what we're selling them for. But it's kind of an interesting thing because when you buy the bike, the battery comes out of the bike. And so when you buy the bike, you're actually buying a battery that you can use independently of the bike. So if you want to like back up your office at your home, or you want to run your laptop at the campsite or something like that, you have this battery you can use. And you can swap them out. So if you're racing, you can have a battery charging while you're racing and then swap them out, kind of thing. So it's a different, we like these small vehicles because of that aspect. The battery is light, it's not expensive. We're still getting 300 kilometers range out of that battery, but because it's a small light vehicle, we don't use a lot of energy. So yeah, we're thinking that this is kind of a nice form factor for batteries, and we'd like to see this become like a ubiquitous kind of a battery that can be used for the multiple vehicles, can be used in people's homes, backing up businesses. We do all sorts of things with this battery. So, but it's definitely small enough for one person to carry 2 of them. That's kind of the goal. Yeah.
So what other maintenance outside of the battery itself would these e-bikes really have?
Nothing, chain and tires. That's it. That's like forever. Like we don't even have a rear brake, so we're using the regenerative braking for the bike. So we're not even wearing out the brake pads. So it should run for 10,000 years, like without any maintenance. Like that's kind of the nice thing about them, right? They should just go forever. Future-proof. Anything that happens in the future is going to be a software upgrade, which we can do over the air, kind of thing. So from a software perspective, they're future-proof. So yeah, we really think this is a vehicle for the future, and it's really fun in the winter too.
Yeah, I was going to ask you about that. Is there that potential maybe down the road, put on some good winter tires and then ride these e-bikes in the wintertime, as long as it's maybe around -5 to -10?
They go better in the cold. They like the cold. So the colder it is, the faster they go.
Now, you mentioned about the range with some of these bikes, and how many kilometers can someone possibly get?
We get about 2 hours riding time if you're really pushing it. If you go in gentle, 3 or 4 hours riding time.
Now, as you were designing and building these bikes, Nathan, and developing the manufacturing process, let's talk about some of the supply chain issues that you mentioned earlier that really came up.
Well, what's nice is that we're only using very high quality components. So the controller we're using is a Canadian company out of Ontario. And they were wonderful at supplying us. Like, they put us at the top of their list, and they were making parts for us by hand to build the bikes we have now. The motor we're using is from the US. The throttles are all European. So like, because we're only using high-end components, we didn't have a lot of problems, really. It wasn't too bad. All the metal we're using is Canadian, all the aluminum's Canadian, and we can get all that. So it really hasn't been too bad for us. Yeah.
What kind of a warranty comes with the bikes?
A 2-year general, and then, like I say, it's a triple lifetime warranty on the frame and motor. So that's kind of we really want to push the idea that you can have this vehicle for your whole life, and even give it to your kids and your grandkids, and they can still use it, right? We really like this aspect of Canada making high quality products, and we're really trying to push that idea as far as we can.
So in your opinion, how important is the energy sector, oil and gas, to fabrication shops such as yours?
Oh, it's immensely important. I mean, it's the oil and gas sector out here is what supports this whole economy, and we're really just trying to complement this. Like, we don't see it going anywhere. We see it growing. Like, we see in the next few years it's probably going to start picking up again and all this kind of stuff. So, but Alberta's switching to more clean energy. So electric vehicles, the bad rap about where we're burning coal to charge them, so they're not actually clean. That's changing a bit now. So we're getting a bit greener on our energy production side of things too. But yeah, all the steel that we use obviously is, right? All the aluminum that we use, the welding, I mean, it's all powered by oil and gas. So it's a big part of the culture out here.
So outside of a welder, what other trades would you be looking for to help you build some of these bikes?
Composites is a big part, welding, metal fabrication, CNC machining. We do a lot of metal 3D printing, which is a fairly new technology, but coming to the point now where it's mature enough to actually make production parts with this. So the foot pegs and our electronic rear brake lever and some other parts on the bike, we metal 3D print from stainless steel, and that's done locally as well.
Coming up after the break, we speak with a specialist to learn more about our local river watershed.
In our bodies, everything's working together to keep us healthy. Similarly with the watershed, we have to work together.